What does system leadership look like when every decision starts with the student? In this episode of Catholic Education Matters, host Kate Fogarty is joined by Dr. Ed Simons, Executive Director of Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools, for a conversation around mission-driven system leadership and the practical work of lifting learning at scale. Drawing on more than 2 decades across the UK and Australia as teacher, principal, policy advisor and system leader, Ed reflects on governance, culture and the centrality of calm, safe and respectful classrooms. Together, Kate and Ed explore how system coherence and culture give teachers clarity without losing local context, the work ahead on attendance and behaviour, and building predictable positive classrooms, supporting teacher growth through clear curriculum, coaching and leadership formation, and why Catholic identity and mission shape the purpose and direction of the whole system. This episode is part of our series of conversations with executive directors of Catholic education around Australia. Whether you're in the classroom, in local leadership, or shaping system strategy, this is a must-listen conversation about purpose, reform, and the future of Catholic education. Now join us as we explore what truly matters in education.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Catholic Education Matters. It's Kate Fogarty here with our next episode, and we're going to go into something a little bit different for the next few episodes, which is conversations with executive directors of Catholic education around Australia. So lots of great conversations I've had, lots of learning to do, and some great stories for you to hear as well. Today, I've got Ed Simons from Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools, or MACS as we fondly call them. Ed, great to have you here with us.
Great to be with you, Kate. Delighted to get the chance to have a chat.
I think it might be helpful for people before we get too far in just to hear a little bit about MACS, because it is an extraordinary education system. I think, if I'm right, it's the largest Catholic education system in the world. Is that right?
It's sizable. It's probably not the largest Catholic system in the world, but it's large. It's daunting. It's nearly 300 schools here in Melbourne, along with a growing early years education network of before and after school care and early learning centres. So I've been told in the past, although I need to fact check it now, that it's the largest Catholic school system in the English speaking world. So we're 120,000 children, approaching 20,000 staff, and it's an absolute pleasure to have the role that I have within MACS.
And let's just talk geographic area. So it's the Melbourne Archdiocese, which stretches, just want to give us some parameters on that for people around Australia?
In geographical terms, it's quite a significant metropolitan archdiocese. In fact, I was out in Geelong just yesterday visiting schools and speaking with colleagues. So that would be about an hour and a half from the cathedral here in Melbourne. And that would stretch out to the west, along the west. Similarly, our furthest school from here is about 2 hours in the opposite direction, up in the northeast of the Archdiocese. And we've got primaries and secondaries in a number of regional areas, as well as the majority of the schools that are in metropolitan Melbourne. Melbourne, to your listeners, would be aware, a large city, a growing city. And I know that one in the not too distant past was voted as one of the most livable cities on the world for many years in a row. We got hit really hard through COVID. Melbourne, the most locked down city on the planet, and that clearly had impacts both into our schools and into broader society in all the ways listeners would be familiar with within their own settings. But it's growing back, it's building back, and it's a fantastic place to call home.
It is indeed. Now, people are probably listening going, hang on, but that accent's not from around here. So let's talk about your journey into Catholic education and how it was you ended up being executive director in Australia, in Melbourne in particular. But perhaps right back at the start, where did you start your journey in Catholic education?
Thanks, Kate. Well, journey in Catholic education began upon arriving in Australia, which is now nearly 20 years ago. Home for me is about 2 hours west of London. So brought up in rural England, mum and dad, both teachers. In fact, mum a speechy who later went into teaching. So upbringing for me was in, kicking around other people's farms and rural England. Mum and dad lived in a cottage. For me, having two parents that worked in education was the best way to have a childhood, because it meant whenever I was on school holidays, so were they. So really fortunate to have a very family-oriented and wonderful upbringing there. Background, well, I read commerce at university, and having heard all the stories about education from mum and dad at every meal table, I thought that's a career I don't think I'm set up for. It sounds far too hard. The challenges with students and parents sounds far too complex. But following studies in commerce, if I'm honest, education was in the heart. And I was fortunate to jump onto the Tony Blair's graduate teacher program, which was in play in the UK at the time back then, and have never looked back from education ever since. So have been working in it for almost the entirety of my working career. In coming over to Australia, as I say, nearly 20 years ago, with at the time my Australian fiance, now my Australian wife, Jessica, there was a chance to jump straight into school leadership. I'd held sort of senior leadership roles in education back in England, but a chance to jump into the helm of principalship, which was an extraordinary opportunity given the stage that I was in my career at that point. And it taught me so much. And clearly one of the things it taught me is all the challenges that are faced in the coalface. We were facing into the school registration process, sort of the compliance process at that time, a process that I'd experienced through Ofsted in England previously. And that went well for us in the school that I was leading, albeit a small school and with limited resources. And to fast forward a little bit, off the back of that, I was given the opportunity to join government, go into the regulatory department of the education department and lead school funding and review and compliance and regulation. So background is classrooms, into government, and then thrilled to get the opportunity to join Catholic education in Western Australia, where I was living at the time, which was a wonderful opportunity to see a fantastic system of Catholic schools right across Western Australia. And I was on the executive team there for almost 8 years.
And what got you excited about coming to Victoria? Like, what was it that you had known about the education system or were interested in that was happening over here?
Yeah, so Catholic Ed in Western Australia had been a system of schools in terms of central policy and funding for over 50 years. And that meant that 4 bishops were working together as one to deliver fantastic education from the Kimberley Desert and remote Aboriginal community schools that offered Catholic education right through to metropolitan settings, 2.5 million square kilometres. But Melbourne in 2021 became a system of schools. And that was a real excitement and interest for me. So what had previously been in the Archdiocese here, 300 distinct schools, owned and operated and governed by each of those parish priests, rolled into a single entity in 2021. So a change in governance, a change in structure, the opportunity to take as much of the very best of the past and the legacy of those who had worked in Catholic education in all the roles in the previous decades and start anew in this new structure. And so it was my understanding of education systems, and particularly Catholic education systems, but as well as government in Australia and the UK, coupled with this new, shiny, exciting beast called Max that had just been born. And so I joined Max when it was about 6 or 7 months old with the intent to support and guide and shape its governance and strategy journey in joining the executive team as I did at that time.
Awesome. And so I know Max, Ballarat and Sandhurst all basically incorporated around the same time. In fact, I think on exactly the same day. Sale had gone a little bit earlier, but Victoria, it was a later journey than what had happened in Catholic education around the rest of the country. In some respects, in other respects, it's then surpassed what's happened in terms of how those companies are set up and what they're doing for their schools. So 4 or 5 years in the role now, and maybe an unfair question, but what's different about the role today from when you first took it on, or what's evolved in your understanding of what it is to be an executive director of Catholic education in Australia?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kate. And just to be clear, subsequent change within the organisation provided the opportunity for me to join this role. So it's been just 2.5 years in the executive director role. What's changed, for me personally, as well as the organisation, has been pretty significant. And I think, both the entity and myself continue to learn and be challenged and try to grow each day. Lots of key areas to focus on over that time. And I think those key areas is perhaps what we'll unpack over the conversation. But for us as an organisation, we've had to work out how we can be better together. And clearly, staff rooms know when they're working in unison and with clarity across a school, the enormous benefits that can flow from that. The challenge, the next step up is how smaller school networks can work together and gain the benefits that enables. For us, it's how might 300 schools come together and join a better together story, focused on the student learning outcomes, focused on the faith formation of our students, and focused on providing the best possible opportunities for all of our staff.
If we ask somebody else, or perhaps for your own self, claiming your own, how would you describe your leadership style, or what has your leadership style shifted in stepping into this role?
Gee, yeah.
Hard, I know.
It is hard, and better to hear that from colleagues that work both close and further away from me. I was sitting, as I mentioned a little earlier, with 2 principals just yesterday, and we were reflecting on leadership of schools, leadership of system, the business of leadership, and the many competing demands. So what I shared with them, and I'm happy to share here, that it is a different role working at the system level for a range of reasons. I don't think that I'm down the sort of, the coal pit, the coal mine, and at the coal face facing into those really sharp, acute issues and challenges, but as well as celebrations that you do in schools. And I really describe that to them. I don't feel like I sort of have, the dirt and the dust on my hand and faces in the way that you do at schools. I've been there and I know how difficult it is. But it's probably the case, therefore, that with that step or two away from schools, you get to see and hear and have to harvest the best bits and the worst bits. And with the number of students and staff that we have, every day brings difficulties and challenges and sadly, obviously, at times tragedies, but it also brings cause for enormous celebration. And so one of the risks, but also one of the wonderful things of working at system level is to try to work your way through the day or the week or the term, riding those peaks and troughs. And I'm very clear that those ups and downs and celebrations and difficult bits can occur in classrooms. I've experienced them, and clearly, so many of our teachers more up to that on every working day that they're in one of our schools. But those best bits and worst bits are typically the bits that then eventually flow through to me. It's a big system. We've got nearly 700 colleagues across our central office structures of 4 or 5 locations, regional offices. We've got an extraordinary leadership centre. We're based here in James Gould House in East Melbourne. And at times you can feel too far away from those crucial local conversations. They can often get to me through many, many mouths or emails or phone calls or texts before I'm catching up with them. But at other times you feel that you really are there walking alongside colleagues and trying to lift and support and guide and shape it in the best possible way. So we are challenged by our size and scale. 4 years into Max, we're still learning how best that operates. But that size and scale also brings resource and opportunity and talent and capability, which I know we're really privileged to have. So one of our focuses is to make sure we're making the very most of those resources that we have available to us.
Are there any leaders or heroes that you look to that guide the kind of leader that you are, Catholic or otherwise, and perhaps, from study that you've done or simply people you've known?
Yeah, and maybe it's a bit cute, but I'd have to say, mum and dad and everything that they gave to me, both through childhood, but also in the way that they continue to support me. My world in education now is very different to the world that they had. And therefore, I appreciate them holding my toes to the fire every time I talk about big bureaucratic topics and issues that they don't think might have impact into classrooms and to assist students and staff. But I've worked with some extraordinary leaders, and I've been fortunate both in terms of learning opportunities near and far. Pretty sure, Kate, that both of us have had the opportunity to study over in Harvard, where you rub up alongside and learn from and listen from some extraordinary leaders and mentors. I've had the opportunity to work alongside and learn and gain so many deep, rich, wise insights from religious men and women also. And I certainly feel that our role is crucial in continuing the enormous contribution that they've given. Although I won't name them, I will say that one of the sort of highlights in terms of the benefits that I've gained has been working with a mentor over a number of years. And they're someone that has been outside my immediate work life and personal life, and therefore that really can be an honest friend in regards to what's going well, what's not going well, where I've fallen short of my expectations, etc., etc. So I know that we're fortunate in Max that there are mentorship roles available for some of our principals, some of our office colleagues, and I think some of our teachers also. In my experience, it's always about finding the right peg for the right hole in that relationship. And it's not always the obvious one that you think it might be, but that has provided extraordinary benefit for me.
I'm so glad you raised that, Ed. I think, it's a learning as you move through leadership that having that critical friend, coach, mentor, whatever you call them, whatever they pitch themselves as out in the marketplace too, that is such an important part of not just improving your leadership capacity and, as you say, having those opportunities to talk about the things that are going well, but also the things that you'd like to improve or things that have really hit and hurt you. It is also about your well-being. It is about an opportunity to really just stop and go, actually, that hurt. And, and I know I've got to put on my big person pants and deal with that. But as a human, this is hard, this work. And working with other humans is hard. And in roles like ours, you are dealing with pointy end issues sometimes that break your heart.
be great to unpack the wellbeing piece. I'm sure, like you, conversations that I'm in so regularly with principals and school leaders and teachers also, there is such a growing issue. It's been an issue for far too long a time in education, but it continues to grow. I think there's sort of significant attempts and investment in trying to support, but I don't think collectively we've got those ingredients right yet in supporting our people. But all I would say in terms of that mentor piece is, as well as challenging and stretching and pushing and prompting, it does also allow celebration. And the busyness of all of our roles, at school and system leadership, there is too big a risk of us sort of just breezing past what ought to be acknowledged or celebrated in a small or more significant way and just getting on to the next day, the next thing, the next challenge. And I think that has a serious impact on well-being, because I think so many of our colleagues should be acknowledged and celebrated, as I say, in a small way or a more significant way, to reflect the enormous benefit and advances that they're providing every day. So the support of a mentor for me has been to check in at both ends of that spectrum.
Ed, do you have a spiritual mentor? Do you have is there a writer you go back to, or a set of stories or something? And acknowledging that this often shifts across your life and that it really shouldn't stay the same. But is there something at the moment that's really stirring your heart and your spirit?
Yeah, great question. And one that I love sort of teasing in the richness of the roles that we have in Catholic education. I'll go to two. There's one sitting right next to me here on my left, and it's my daily prayer book. We give the daily prayer book to all of us on the executive team here at Catholic Education. It provides gospel readings of the day, and it is astonishing how often you open that book in the morning and reflect on the readings of the day, and they were either exactly what happened yesterday or something that you're pretty likely might crop up in the day. So there's a daily fuel for the journey that I get from that. But in terms of readings and writings, I could speak for a little while on John Henry Newman, that I have a natural affinity to. Obviously, he's in the news more than perhaps typically would be, given Holy See, has announced that he'll be becoming a doctor of the Church. English by background and convert by background, like myself, into the Catholic faith. So there's been a number of personal and pivotal moments in my faith journey that intertwine into readings or experiences with him. And to go into one, I was fortunate to be at a course over in England a couple of years ago, which was taking place at Oriel College there in Oxford. And I was just having a quiet little moment up behind the organ in the chapel there at this extraordinary mystical college, this sort of seat of learning there in the town of Oxford. And behind the organ there in the chapel are these quite modern windows, stained glass windows, that depict the scenes and the life and the person of John Henry Newman, and include some of his actual handwriting that's sort of been transcribed onto these beautiful stained glass windows. And sitting there and sharing some thoughts and some prayers and really reflecting on how fortunate I am. I came out of the chapel and into the quad there at the college, and one of the porters walked past me, and I didn't know him and he didn't know me, and he said, I don't know if you've heard the news, but Queen Elizabeth has just passed away, which obviously, being in England at that time and being English, but obviously home for me now, Australia, but an enormous moment. And there was a dinner at the college that night, and there was the big portrait of the Queen, and there were people from all over the world gathered. And so it was an interesting point in time to be there in the location that I was. But I closed the story off by saying, a couple of weeks later at her funeral, obviously the Queen as head of the Church of England, John Henry Newman as a former Anglican that converted to Catholicism. And it was particularly poignant that she chose one of his prayers to have read at her funeral. His thinkings, his writings, far too deep and intellectual for me at times. But when I really focus and get into them, someone that I've learned a lot from around both the complexities and the simplicities of life.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go big now, Catholic education more broadly. What's exciting you about what's happening in Catholic education, or what for you is feeling like this is where we're being called and drawn at the moment?
Kate, probably you and me, same on a number of topics. I am excited. This year is the Jubilee year, where we focus on a sense of hope. I am deeply hope-filled. There is so much good work going on. There's so much effort, and I think rewards are beginning to flow from that. So to go back a little, I guess, to be frank in the conversation that we're going to have, when I got here, the results from our parish primary schools here in Melbourne, about 250, you and I know, tireless effort, tireless hard work, teachers doing their absolute best. But for one reason or another, and clearly with COVID in the heart of that context, we just weren't getting the results that we felt that we needed. In fact, the likelihood is when I turned up into Melbourne with my family and my 3 primary school age children, if we'd chosen any of the schools across the Archdiocese, the primary schools, there was a decent chance, a fair likelihood that the results that my 3 kids would have received in terms of numeracy and the NAPLAN, the standardised results here in primary school, would have been behind those of the government school up the road. And that sort of brings a couple of reactions to me, including fantastic government education. Well done then for really punching through in recent times and delivering, I think, a far better, stronger, richer academic education than perhaps they've been able to in the past. But I also feel in regards to the significant government funding support that we receive that we needed to lift our game and really hold our end of the bargain and help advance the conversation more broadly around education across Victoria, in our context Melbourne, a bit further. I'm delighted to say in regards to some of the initiatives which we can unpack this year, it's now the case that it's more likely that if you attend one of our primary schools, your numeracy results will be above those of the government school up the road. And that's thanks to an enormous amount of research, hard work and effort by schools and teachers over the last 2 or 3 years. So that gives me a huge amount of hope. So there's a big topic we could go to in terms of instruction and learning and pedagogy. I have hope around engagement and attendance. My eyes are drawn to the attendance stats around the world. And right now here in Melbourne, we're as disappointing as they are anywhere, be that England, be that the US, be that other places in the Western world. But we've launched recently our vision for engagement, which is, I know, going to have a massive impact there in supporting students and families and staff. If I'm honest, I'm really excited about some other areas in Max as well, including RE curriculum and digital reimagination and what we're doing to support some of our most vulnerable schools. So there's a big sense of hope, a big sense of change and excitement, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. There's some huge challenges as well.
It's a tension, isn't it? Yeah,
That's
right. Getting excited about these things. And what you've spoken about there is really the holistic kind of nature of what it is to be in senior leadership in Catholic education. We're talking about learning and teaching. We're talking about engagement, talking about religious education, talking about the systems and structures and programs that have to sit in behind that to enable our teachers and our leaders to focus in on the things that matter and not get caught up in the admin and the finances and all the things that drag their thoughts away from, putting the child right at the centre of what we do. Perhaps let's go to engagement, because I think that's the most recent document that you've launched. And I think it's one of the most challenging ones to, really get to the heart of. I think if we, can go to learning and teaching, but the evidence is there now and we're all in train with all of that. But engagement is this amorphous kind of difficult space that everybody around the world, as you say, but particularly here in Australia, are looking at. What is it about that vision for engagement that's really, for you, looks like it's going to capture the hearts and minds and actually lead to change of the people in Max?
It's a huge topic, Kate, and I know I won't do it justice, but happy to paint from my perspective. I think one of the early stats that really made it clear in my mind that we've got to do something, and we've got to do something at speed and at scale, was it Australia? So we're sort of zooming that lens out to the nation. But as Australian, I think we ranked 69th out of 72 on the OECD league table for classroom behaviour. And that shocked me. I know it shocks people when I share the statistic in small groups and larger groups. And it's simply not good enough. It's not good enough that our students are exposed to contexts and environments which doesn't allow learning to take place. And as we know, far too often that involves classrooms in the most disadvantaged areas where kids need every support around them to get the lifelong opportunities that they deserve. But it's also not fair on our teachers who are having to turn up to workplaces and be in circumstances and settings which isn't fair and just for them either. So with behaviour at the back of mind, but knowing that this, obviously the topic of engagement extends far beyond that, we've been so fortunate to work, with internal experts, and I'd need to call out Bern Cronin and Mary Oski and others in our that directorate here at Max, but with external and international experts as well, to form a document or a roadmap which we launched just a few months ago that will focus on some key areas that we think will change the dial. So I've spoken about behaviour, and teaching respectful behaviour will be a core element of that. We know it can be intentional, and we know there's such strong evidence to support our teachers and students to be in a safe and calm and respectful environment. But there are other key elements to that whole school approach and the multi-tiered system of supports that will be supporting schools who are already on the journey with further resources and further professional training, and for those that are new to it, really helping them get a sort of kickstart along the journey. And those other areas will be around fostering belonging. We know belonging is such a crucial word within our Catholic schools. What does it mean to be a part of that that Catholic school, both as student and as staff member, but also as family member. We'll be focusing on attendance, which I've touched on briefly. Attendance levels post-COVID in Melbourne remain a huge challenge, and we've got to be, again, more deliberate and intentional about how we can support students to spend far more time in school than some of them are able to at the moment. We're going to be promoting mental health and well-being. We've touched on that already. We know what a huge issue that is for our students, and both how that is impacting classrooms and staff rooms at a low level, seemingly in a continuous way, but also, at a far more significant and serious and very impactful way on far too many occasions. Also, we're going to be driving into the evidence that enables how we can enable motivation across the system, and crucially, and in regards to both learning and engagement, we're going to be targeting the individual learning needs of students. What do individual students need as a result of the circumstances they're facing into, so that we're clear on what the evidence tells us will give them the best opportunities to engage in learning.
Ed, I think, it's such an interesting area, isn't it? It feels to me like the education sector is on board with this notion of engagement and all those elements that you just listed. There is an understanding that this is a very holistic discussion that's deep and complex and broad, and is going to need investment and energy and research across a lot of different areas to actually bring together. I'm just not long back from spending time in England and looking at some of the multi-academy trusts and some of the work that they're doing in this very space, because there's deep issues there as well. One of the things that really captured us when we were there was the notion of our civic responsibility more broadly as education systems, and the relationships that we formed with government, with agencies, with community groups, with families, well beyond the school gates, taking responsibility for the upstream issues that bring our children to the school gates. And I think that is something that we probably haven't had a huge discourse about in Australia. There's a lot of us chipping away in tiny little ways, and we know there's lots of principles forming relationships with local agencies, but looking at this at a higher level and thinking about what are the big levers that we can pull together. Because while we in education are picking up, the complexity of this issue of engagement, I'm not sure that we're really using the knowledge that we have to engage with other entities to address these issues.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Kate. I mean, there's so much there, isn't it, as you allude to. When we launched the document, given there was so much there, but given we wanted to capture attention to what we were saying and what we were launching, the key message that I decided to go on was technology and use of technology, which obviously, given the list I've just given you in regards to what Vision for Engagement focuses on, isn't as explicitly named in regards to the broad brushstrokes of others. But at a personal level and a professional level, to your point there about partnership and engagement into a whole range of other entities beyond education, we've got to start motoring far more quickly than we've been able to so far on use of and exposure to technology, AI, social media, etc. within classrooms and at school gates. So the phrase I used at the launch was that we are and we will continue to explore ways to get devices down and a heads up, because I can be a little controversial in what I say on these topics, but global tech companies have done an extraordinary job in Australia over the last decade or two, and I'm sure with good intentions around the learning opportunities that technology could bring. I've seen devices in hands of kids up in Kimberley desert schools and recognise the benefit that can bring to learning, in the same way that I have seen them in the hands of kids in schools in metro areas. But I think that technology companies have led that conversation more than educators. And I think now we're at a point in time, given, that just the speed of advancement of tech, including AI, that we have to be so clear and intentional about when kids have got tech in their hands at school and when they don't. And I think we've left that decision-making, that complex decision-making, up to too many teachers for too long, who don't necessarily have the key data and the key stats available to make the best decisions, which of course that's the only one they want to make.
And I think, again, this goes to the same point, doesn't it? We haven't used the knowledge that's coming in from other sectors as well. You go straight to neuroscience, straight to the, what we know is shifting in the brain and indeed how learning happens. It's embarrassing in some respects how late the education sector has come to this knowledge. But I know here in Sandhurst we share that concern and are active actively working to be very intentional and deliberate about when and where devices are used. And just incidentally, by the programs that we're implementing in our schools to improve learning and teaching, to improve literacy, numeracy outcomes, wellbeing outcomes, all of those sorts of things, the use of those devices is decreasing anyway.
And of course, I think there's such a vital role. I agree. I think cross education Australia, perhaps the same in other countries. It's been hard to either keep up or get ahead of the conversation for all the obvious reasons. But I think we have such a crucial role to play in supporting and educating parents in the space as well. And I know schools do that to the best of their ability. And I know some are able to do it in different ways to others. But I think collectively, we've got to be far more intentional in this space.
Yeah. Ed, let's go back to leadership more broadly in Catholic education. What advice would you give to people who are aspiring to leadership in Catholic education, or from those ones who just have a little inkling of, maybe I'm ready for something new, to those who are actually deep into their leadership journey, whether they're deputy principals, or, even leaders in our system? What's your advice?
Advice is go for it. We need more leaders. We're desperate for more better leaders. We need to get better centrally at how we support those pathways and journeys into leadership. I think in my day yesterday, I sat with a number of principals in different settings, each one of them different from the next, each one of them unique, each one with a different set of skill sets and perspectives. And leadership journeys and leadership characteristics, each one of them leading a really successful school. So I worry sometimes that there's unintentional ways that we're trying to morph leaders into a certain box or into a certain mold, and I couldn't disagree with that more. I think we need authentic leaders who can demonstrate who they are, both in regards to their own faith leadership in our Catholic context, but also in regards to their educational leadership. I think we're asking a huge amount of leaders in the same way that we're asking a huge amount of classroom teachers and other colleagues in school settings. And therefore, we've got to get better at packaging support and providing clarity to those roles. But I'm fortunate. I sit in rooms with aspiring leaders and those on leadership pathways, fairly often, not as often as I'd like to. And I see curious, and I see engaged, and I see vibrant conversations, and I see people that want to make a difference. And for me, the leaders that recognize that, well, of course, the world's not perfect. Max isn't perfect. Our schools aren't perfect. My goodness, there's a huge amount of effort that is going in right now. But people that feel that they can make a genuine difference for the better. So I have conversations with principals where they sometimes agree with me and don't agree with me, and vice versa. But I'm always up for the conversation when we've got the student at the center of that in terms of what we want impact on, and that we're driving forward into what we hope will be a better system. So advice is go for it. I know that's easy for me to say. I know there's all sorts of personal and professional challenges that come into a decision in regards to leadership trajectory. But it astonishes me how much sense of opportunity and zest and willingness to make a difference there is, and the generosity that comes with that. I see it in our system. I see it obviously in Catholic ed systems, right across the country. We've gone to it earlier. I'm glass half full on this. There are challenges. They are getting bigger. But I also think that with that, people are stepping forward who want to make a really significant impact.
I think last week was the National Catholic Education Conference. I didn't get up there. I don't know if you did, Ed, but, hearing our people come back and just that joy of being able to be in a room with other people who value Catholic education, who are committed in their leadership to assuring the best for young people, who deeply believe that Catholic education has something special to offer Australia, is really important. One of my responses when I get asked, what advice do you have for leaders or people who are aspiring? Just surround yourself with other people who are in leadership in Catholic ed. Just sit down and have a conversation with somebody, because I think, it can be lonely to be in leadership, and it is actually conversely a collective enterprise. We don't do it on our own in Catholic ed, and we are very deeply committed to system. And in fact, Catholic, we are a we people. That's the whole thing. We are about communion and being together and doing things together. So yeah, I think, encouraging people to get into conversation with, whether it's us when they cross us, when we're through their schools, or their own leaders in their own local community, or reaching out to others in other schools. There's nothing like just hearing from somebody who's human and just had a go and doing their best.
Exactly. And of course, with Jesus, we're given the role model of the servant teacher, the servant leader. And we know our principals are serving their school community, doing all that they can for the benefit of student, parish, staff, wider sense of community. And therefore, I think those that go in wide-eyed on that sense of service are absolutely what we need to take us forward as Max over the next decade or two.
Speaking of that, working together and collaborating, I think this is a good opportunity to just share with people a little bit about the way that people at our level work together and what that looks like, because I suspect most people wouldn't have a clue what we get up to. But for those who are wondering, we, Ed, myself, the other executive directors of the Catholic Diocese, and a person who represents the Religious Institute schools meet a couple of times a term with the Victorian Catholic Education Authority. We meet formally, and we're, working through those issues that we have in common and those things that we have to have agreement on together and that we want to progress together. So there's that opportunity, but there's a lot of incidental things, isn't there, Ed, where we're texting each other or checking in or, seeing what programs we have in common and connecting people within our organisations to get things done.
I love it. That we'll, Kate or our colleagues, as you mentioned, will, pass each other in a corridor or an event or, grab 5 minutes somewhere. And we're all facing into, similar topics. They're nuanced by locations and various other matters. I know for one, I benefit hugely from the chances to check in, never enough. And to your point about the national conference, I was able to attend. It was up in Cairns. We had nearly 200 colleagues that attended from Max. So there was a great sense of community and solidarity amongst the Max group, both school and office colleagues. But to your point, it was just great to bump into people from around the country that you sort of known for a short while or for a much longer while and renew friendships over a coffee or the water cooler. We do check in. It's crucial that we do that. I don't make the point lightly that difficulties and challenges that each of the Catholic ed systems in Victoria face into are somewhat similar in nature. And therefore, when we get our heads around the table, it's both trying to, come to solutions, but I think also support each other. Well, I certainly get a sense of that, support each other on the journey.
Ed, we're staring down the barrel of our time here. The really big question, what is it that gives you hope in Catholic education at the moment? What gets you out of bed in the morning, or what is it? Where are the green shoots that you see that you think, wow, there's something in this?
Literally, I could have an hour on this. To the point of the question it's not a case of brushing over the difficulties, of which there are many and they're significant. But I do have hope. I see hope in student enrolments, which are growing in Melbourne. There are more parents choosing Catholic schools than ever before, and that's testament to the outstanding work that our schools do. I see hope in a growing sense of teaching and learning, and I know the impact that will have and the support that we're providing to teachers in that regard. I see hope in the RE curriculum that we're rolling out and how that, alongside our sense of mission identity in schools, is growing and where greater clarity will come. I see hope in not just the local church or the Australian church, but the global church. Obviously, with a change in Pope, I think we are curious and intrigued, but excited and hope-filled in regards to the leadership that Leo will give the global church and the perspectives and intentions he will bring to Catholic education. I have hope because I'm surrounded by countless fantastic colleagues, and I'm fortunate to get out to a school or two almost every week. And I see smiles and I see professionalism and I see children at the centre of conversations and I see schools and parishes working together. And despite governance changes and many other changes and obstacles, I see people that are Christ-centered and student-focused and doing the very best work that they can. And on that, I think that if Mary McKillop was able to do a tour of our schools today, I think she would feel positive. I think she would see that the legacy that she and so many other extraordinary religious women and men brought to Australia with that sheer raw determination to provide education to those most at need, not always of Catholic faith, but those where they saw the need and, as we know, they did something about it. And we fast forward to now, and I know this would be the case across Victoria, but in Melbourne, I see that legacy continuing. I see it continuing with a growing sense of professionalism and rigour and evidence and determination. And I genuinely and authentically feel excited about the future of Catholic education in Melbourne.
Thank you. We always end this podcast with the one question, which is thinking about everything that we've spoken about. What matters the most? What matters from everything that we've touched on? And we've covered a fair bit of turf.
What matters most to me as a student. That's why we're here. We're here to provide the very best education, the very best Catholic education that we can to each one of our 120,000 students at Max. So what matters most is that we're doing that in the best way that we can. We're supporting the student. My role, of course, is to support, those staff members that do all that they do to support that student. So what matters most is student, and therefore what students give us is a sense of hope enjoy in the future. So with those ingredients of positivity, I think we'll continue to do what we can to give those children the very best education, to give them the best pathways forward into their lives.
Thanks, Ed. Terrific answer, and a lovely message, not just to the staff of Max, I think, but to anybody in Catholic education. In fact, education more broadly across Australia. So thank you for your time. All the very best with your terrific work with Max, and we'll look forward to hearing how all of those programs roll out and the great things that are happening for the young people across the Archdiocese of Melbourne.
Great work on the podcast, Kate. Delighted to be a part of it. And look forward to catching up soon.
That's it for this episode of Catholic Education Matters. Make sure to follow the show and share it with someone who's passionate about learning, leadership and community. You can also leave a review or connect with us online at Catholic Education Sandhurst. Until next time, stay with us as we explore what truly matters in education.